My name's Helen Scott. I am guest hosting this event, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Venkat to our Q&A this afternoon for me, very early this morning for Venkat. So he is joining us from Colorado, so big thank you for getting up so early. We sure do appreciate it. Our wonderful community have submitted tons of questions for you. We have questions on your speaker experience. We have questions on Java, lots of questions on Java, including some really cool questions, I have to say, and then some more general questions. Now, the speaker questions are the smallest ones, but I'm going to start with them. Everybody in the audience who's watching, feel free to drop your questions if you have any in the chat. If you submitted a question, I am going to try and get to them all. I'm going to apologize now if I don't, but I am going to try and get through them all. But if we have any time left over, we will definitely come to the ones in the chat, or if you have something absolutely burning whilst Venkat is answering another question, just come off mute and we can have a conversation. So that sound like a plan? Give me some nods, give me some thumbs up. Awesome. Okay, let's get started. Venkat, nice easy one to warm you up. Again, I'm going to start with the speaker ones. We've got 6 or 7 here. You are a very experienced speaker. You have traveled the world speaking at conferences and during the pandemic, speaking into a webcam. For some of our newer speakers out there, how do you gain confidence in public speaking? What's your tips and tricks for that one?
All right. Well, Helen, thanks again for having me and making this happen. And thanks everyone for joining. So one of the things that, this question brings back some sweet memories of the time that when I started speaking, and it's natural to be nervous, natural to, feel that, pressure in the mind. It's like, oh my gosh. In fact, I'll share with you one story. This happened maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. I was giving a keynote in JFocus in Sweden, and the person who was in charge of AV was putting the microphone on me, and she said, you appear very nervous. And I said, yes, I am. And she said, is this your first talk? I said, well, this is probably my 1000th talk. And then she said, well, you're going to do okay, don't worry about it. Well, and so being nervous actually is a good thing in my opinion, because it simply means that you care about it. But to me, my nervousness comes in because you want the talk to go well. You want to make sure that, everything goes well. A lot of other things can go wrong, right? You may have an audio problem, video problem, given talks where, things go off rail because the, computer shuts down. So it's natural to have those concerns. But to me, one of the key things to really think about is nobody is an authority on any topic. And no matter how hard we try, there's always going to be 2 things, right? Things I don't know, and there's always going to be people who know more than I do. And so that, I think, it's really senseless to fight that. But instead, I think a talk should really focus on your experience. And as a speaker, no one can take away your experience. It's the story that you want to tell about your journey. What did you learn? How did you learn about it? What are your impressions about it? What is your critical thinking? Why do you like something? Why don't you, want to follow certain principles or practices? So as long as you focus on telling your story and be very honest and genuine about it, I think we then tend to forget that we are giving a talk, and then we are really, engaged in that conversation on the topic. And then I always say that the topic then takes over, and we become insignificant compared to the, the topic and the audience interacting, and then let it take over after that. And that becomes more natural once we realize that, we're not in a competition. We are not there to be judged. And invariably, I found that audience usually are genuinely interested in learning, and they really are interested in the speaker to be successful, because hey, it's their time as well, and they would rather be in a good talk than in a bad talk, wasting their time. So almost everything is going for you once the audio and the video gets working, I would say. So ride on it, and it becomes easier after that.
Thank you. I think maybe that could be summarized as use your authenticity, and you are nervous because you care, and that's a good thing. I always think the day I come to do a talk and I'm not nervous is the day It's not the day for talking. So a few people have joined us, or a few more people have joined us. So just to let you all know, we have lots of questions tonight. We are starting with a few speaker questions. We're then going to go into lots and lots of Java questions before finishing up with some general questions. So I will try and get to all questions, but if you have any additional ones, please drop them in the chat. So sticking on the speaker theme, Venkat, the question actually is, what do you do if you accidentally mess up? And I kind of want to change it to, what do you do when you mess up or something goes wrong? Because we all do it.
Oh, absolutely. And so I'll tell you what we don't or shouldn't do before I talk about what we should do. A lot of times you may see a speaker begin to mumble, oh my gosh, this is not working, the compiler error, I don't know what to do. Well, engage the audience. And that's what I found to be the most effective. I would type something and the whole thing will fall off. And suddenly somebody from the audience, and usually it's more than one person, would say, well, you got a syntax error on that line, or you should call this function. And immediately what I do is I press a button and I turn on the line number and say, could you help me with the line number where the error is? And they would say, oh, look at line 26. I'm like, oh, of course, darn it. And then I would normally say, well, you restored faith in pair programming for me. So engage the audience. You don't have to solve all the problems by yourself as a speaker. In fact, I would say this is a sign of a good talk is when the audience can find the problem and point out very quickly when you make a mistake. That means they are engaged, they are connected, they are following. But I'll share with you one experience I would never forget. I was giving a talk on lazy evaluation, and I was talking about why evaluation has to be postponed, how it's efficient. And about 5 minutes into a particular example, the code did not work. And I was struggling to find out why the code didn't work. And a lady in the audience said, go to the third file you were looking at. And I said, well, third file. So I went to the third file. And she said, look at line 25. And I look at line 25 and she says, that's wrong. And I said, and you knew it when I typed it and you never told me about it. And I said this jokingly, and this was touche. She said, well, you're the one who said we should be lazy, right? And I was like, absolutely. This is when you really know that you're in sync with the audience. And I'm like, this is amazing. Well done. So that's exactly what I would do, is engage the audience and write with it. And that becomes really a good talk, because the audience feel empowered that they are actually participating in this as well. And they're able to find the problems, which is a sign that they're understanding the concepts as well. Brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And the audience, I think the same goes for the end of a talk as well. A lot of new speakers, or I've certainly had this question asked, that what do you do if somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer? And the answer is, you ask the audience, because you can't possibly know everything. You have to stick with your authenticity, but almost certainly there's somebody in the audience who can help out. So awesome, thank you. This question has clearly come from somebody who perhaps saw that talk or one of your many others. Tell me about the prep and rehearsal of your live coding sessions, please, because they are legendary.
I would actually say in the beginning, when I started doing it, I would spend a lot of time preparing. But to be absolutely frank and honest about it, when I do a live coding talk, let's say the talk is scheduled for 10 a.m. I'm not making this up. This is honestly the way I do it. At 4 in the morning, I am running the code. I am practicing. And I'm not practicing the talk per se, right? I don't stand up and give a talk and practice, but I would just run through the examples and make sure everything's working, mainly because you want to know the environment is set up properly, the compilers are the right versions you are using. You're on a given day, you are developing code. I would switch between client projects. I may change a version of Java, for example, or an IDE. I may have, installed a newer version, and it totally, is out of my mind. And I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't have the right version of the compiler or the IDE. Just the peace of mind running through the code once helps me to know that things are set up. Things will still go wrong, but the confidence, that, yep, I ran the code at 4 this morning, it's going to go okay at 10 o'clock. So a lot of practice really goes into it. In a lot of ways, when you see that a talk seems to be really smooth and almost effortless, it usually means there's a lot of effort that's gone into it. So it never is an option to not practice, and practice to gain confidence, practice to refresh your memory, practice to just rethink about the examples you want to give. And a lot of times as I'm doing it, I say, oh, it'd be so cool to really give this other example I didn't think about before. So there's other benefits as well. But the practice is quite different, right? Practice is not in just giving the talk and saying the words. I don't do that anymore. Used to very long time ago, maybe 25 years ago, I did that, where I would give a talk several times a day. But these days, it's just sitting through, writing the code once, thinking through the examples, thinking about this narrative arc. And a lot of times, when you give a talk a couple of times, is when it kind of falls in place and you realize, I want to start here, I want to go through this journey of the topics, and I want to conclude over here. That narrative arc is something you want to, so to say, bootstrap in your mind and load into your memory and say, this is the journey I want to walk through the talk. That can be really helpful as well. So that's kind of the things that I would like to practice these days, and I do as well in the mornings when I get started. If I'm giving a talk, maybe 2 or 3 conferences in a week, then of course I don't have to go through that practice, because things from Monday usually stay through Friday. But if I've not given a talk for maybe a month or 2, I would just go back and redo the examples 1 or 2 times just to refresh my memory on it.
Brilliant, thank you. So practice, practice, practice. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
No alternative to that, yes.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question on the speaker section, and then we're going to move on to Java. So the final question for the speaker section is, you co-authored the book Presentation Patterns, and I know you and I have spoken about this particular topic, but for the wider audience, what are your thoughts on presenter notes, please?
Oh, so I'm going to say your mileage may vary. I carry 0 presenter notes for my talks. And I've got good friends who write a lot of presenter notes and they use it. I consider them a lot of cases like a training wheel, and it's a bit of a distraction, at least for me. So typically, I feel one with the topics I'm talking about. So it's a topic that I've thought about a lot. It's a topic I often have an opinion about. It's a topic where I've got a story to tell. So these things are very well in my mind. So I don't even remember using presenter notes. Maybe in the first year, I probably have used one, but I've almost never used presenter notes. And the reason really is, when it disrupts the flow for me, right? I want my talks to be genuine and natural. I want to talk from my heart. I want to talk from my knowledge that I have. And so these are the topics that I've researched quite a bit, or used quite a bit, or devised a particular technique. For example, I don't need a notes to remind me. In fact, I've kind of gotten away from using slides over the years. That's the reason. I usually have a bullet list of topics I want to talk about, and I rant away. And the reason really is that I really want to bring out my understanding of the topic. And so in a way, it's kind of like, things like a semantics is something you remember very well. Things I don't often remember are the syntax, for example, right? So for example, not even a syntax, even to go to the example, if you suddenly ask me, write an example to convert degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, I know the formula, but I'm not going to remember it instantaneously. So what I tend to do is, anything that I need to remember, I put that as a visible notes rather than a hidden speaker notes. So I would put that as part of my topics list, or in the case of a slide, let it be visible. There's no reason to hide it from the audience. So that becomes very open and clear. And then so, if you're able to get rid of speaker notes, I would say that's the best thing. But again, that's why I want to say your mileage may vary depending on the presenter. If they feel a lot more comfortable doing it, I don't want to say that's a bad idea, because it's inappropriate to say this is the right way to do. There is no real right way to do. This is what has worked for me, but I'm okay if something else is working for others in a better way than it does for me.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, I did my most recent presentation without presenter notes, and it actually felt a little bit more freeing and a little bit more empowering. So I'm going to stick with that line. Marit, are you okay? Okay. Right, we are going to move on to the Java questions now. Nice, well, hopefully easy one to get you started, Venkat. How or why, maybe both, did you get into programming and computer science?
Sorry, what was the last word? Programming and what?
Computer science.
Oh, actually.
Well, I'm assuming that's what CS stands for in this.
Oh, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm almost in tears when you ask this question because it's very personal. When I was actually in finishing up school and just about getting ready to go to college, I had an uncle who would keep visiting from time to time. And he came to me and he was talking about what my interest is or was. And little did I know at that time, but he actually was teaching me algorithm without me realizing he was teaching algorithm. I didn't have access to computers back then. We're talking about 35 years ago, and I didn't have access to computers. And he actually asked me to solve certain problems, during the visits. And I would take a piece of paper and I would be writing the algorithms on a paper. He was my compiler. He would verify if the algorithm is correct. He would challenge me to improve the algorithms. He would talk about performance. He would talk about efficiency, computation complexities and so on. And then a few years later, back in time, we didn't have to select our major when we started college. We did that about 2 years into the program. And it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to become a mechanical engineer. And I was looking at the options available, and I saw computer science, and I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to do computer science. And I selected, honestly, without knowing a whole lot, mainly because he had really influenced me into thinking about computing. And then that's kind of what started me into programming, his influence in teaching me algorithms, or telling me that he has been teaching me algorithms.
That's a really lovely story. What a kind and thoughtful way of introducing you to the subject, and look where it's taken you, all over the world. Okay, so this is kind of two questions, maybe the answer is the same for both. What are your top tips for junior devs, same for senior devs? What are your top tips?
Top tips,
juniors and seniors.
Oh, yes. And in fact, it probably is the same as you kind of alluded to. And I would say, let me step back and say the words of Newton for a minute. Newton said, I see the farthest because I sit on the shoulders of the giants, he said. And I remember those words a lot. Not that a lot of us are, and me included, any close to how genius Newton was. But we learn a great deal from collaboration from each other. And I really wish we did this better in our field. I cannot tell you how many days I think of it. The very first day when I took my very, very first job, I go to my job and they said, thanks for joining. We're so happy you are here. And they put me in a room and they shut the door and walked away. And they said, you can get your work done. And the first thing I did was I called my wife and said, I don't have a clue why I'm here. They think that I can actually do something here, and I'm quite shocked. Well, I got married when I was a student, so she was my best friend ever since that time. And I called her and said, I don't know what to do now. I'm in this room, and they expect me to actually do some work. And I realized that day that we have a fundamental flaw in our field. We isolate people rather than collaborate with them. So the first thing I would say as a junior developer is be absolutely shameless. Don't try to pretend that you know stuff. Let's be honest. Nobody knows everything, right? Whether you're senior or junior, there are things to learn every single day. So, have people critique your work. So create something, go to a colleague, doesn't have to be a senior developer or not, and say, hey, I created this code. Can you review it? What are your impressions? What are the things I can do to improve? Tell me what you like about this code. Tell me what I should improve. Ask for that kind of feedback. I think you can learn a great deal from, being critiqued. As a senior developer, don't try to pretend that you are absolutely great at doing what you do. Let's be honest about it. You kick and you scream and you curse when you write the code. Doesn't matter how many years of experience you have. So make that visible to junior developers so they don't freak out thinking, oh my gosh, these people are great and awesome. I don't know anything in this field. Let's show them you are vulnerable as much as anybody else is. Show them it's a struggle. Show them that you fight these ideas every day. You're not sure if a design concept is good or needs improvement. I think that can be really reaffirming for other developers to know that this is a journey and they need to be humble about it. They need to be empathetic about it. And I think that makes us a lot better human at workforce, more than just being people who can write code. One of the problems we often have, and I feel this myself, is when we express code as a program, we are invariably very logical, we are very methodical, we are very thorough in giving that instruction, and that sometimes sucks the empathy out of our minds. We have fewer tolerance, sometimes we are very curt in communication, but those things are not really great for making us better humans. By having that, showing that part of us saying, we still have doubts in what we do, we still have uncertainty in our decisions, I think can make it for a better environment as well. So ask for reviews as a junior developer, and reveal your mental process and show. I was teaching a course this morning, and one of the developers said, I'm curious to know about the thought process that goes into it. And I said, that's a brilliant question, because we can come up with a design, but you want to know how we arrive at the design, right? So that is an extremely important aspect. And the fact that this developer, asked that question, I was so happy, is because that's the aspect we tend to really forget oftentimes, is to show me the journey that led you to the decisions you make, something you can share as a senior developer with others in the team as well.
Fantastic. And just so we can clear it up for good, senior developers use Google too, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. The next question is quite specific. It's two questions grouped. How do you test multi-threaded code? And more specifically, how do you test multi-threaded code for performance?
Oh, fantastic question. A few years ago, I created a talk specifically on unit testing multi-threaded code. I'll be more than happy to share a link elsewhere. And this really came out of a project I was working on, where I was teaching a client about automated testing and test-driven development, and then they a few 6 months or so into it, they called me up and said, we need really extra hands. Can you come and program with us? And when I started programming, the application required enormous multi-threading. And the architect in the team, I asked him to review my code after I had written the code. And he came over, sat down, and he said, hang on a second. And he kind of looked at the code, and then he sat down and said, you can proceed now. And I said, what were you looking for? And he said, well, I know this code is multi-threaded, but you're the one who introduced automated testing for us. So I was curious if you only teach or you actually practice what you teach. This was a pretty close call. So I devised a few techniques to write a multi-threaded test multi-threaded code. But the gist is this. I don't believe you can seriously test a multi-threaded code by running the code millions of times. That's not going to prove a fault exists. It's going to simply prove you did not run into the problem yet. So my recommendation is, think through your design. You really want to write your test to verify that the design is actually in place. So what are the things you would really like to test? I often want to test that my code has threat safety. And if a code has threat safety, one way is to avoid mutability. But if you do have mutability, you want to make sure there is a proper locking under critical sections. So what I typically do is write test cases to verify the critical sections are on, when you enter a critical section, you acquired a lock. When you leave a critical section, you release the lock. When there was an exception, you release the lock. So I write tests for these different purposes. So once you test the design, you have a guarantee that the design is preserved in the code. There's also confidence that you thought through this and you work through the design. So in short, write tests for the design rather than test for the behavior of the code. It is not something you can get away with the empirical test. It's something you need to do a lot more. Like I said, I have a talk related to this, and on my website I have an example that's posted as well. I'll be more than happy to share the link later on if others are interested, or just drop an email to me. I'll post my email address here on the chat as well. So I'll be more than happy to share if anyone is interested with that. And if it's a topic that's extremely interesting to somebody, I'm not saying this lightly, drop me an email. We can schedule a time, an hour, where I'll be more than happy to just go through the topic of automated testing of multi-threaded code. If somebody is genuinely interested in writing tests, I want to do everything and anything possible to make that happen. So I'll be delighted to spend more time on this topic at a different time.
Fantastic. That's good. I think there's definitely appetite for that topic, because the next question, which you've answered in that one, is how do you approach performance testing in the systems and applications that you work on? So very similar, lots of people thinking about that space, and of course Loom is coming. Okay, we're going to go up a level out of the weeds. How do I convince my business managers for things like Java 17 upgrade? I fear this poor soul might still be on Java 8, as it'd have little business value. I'm putting the quotes around business value, but I can understand what this developer's saying.
Yeah, and I would say don't. That's the right answer, I think. Don't try to convince them. And a lot of these things are implementation detail. So the business doesn't care about how we implement, but we do. So the person that needs to be convinced is not the business. The person that needs to be convinced is ourselves. So ask yourself why you are better off using a certain version of Java. Is that going to make you productive? Is that going to give you a set of tools that help you to design the code in a better way? And if you do find that it's going to make you productive, or if it is something that gives you a certain tools to design your code in a better way, well, then go ahead and start doing it, using it, because so one of the principles I try to follow is this. I don't want to convince other people about things they shouldn't care about. And I think that is one of the most important things to consider. What is telling people what is not relevant to them actually complicates matter a lot more. So I often ask the question, do I need to discuss this with the other person? And if I'm going to discuss with the other person, why should they know about it? How does it benefit them? And how does it benefit me in them knowing about it? And there are certain things as a professional that I need to be doing. And I don't need to be getting a permission from somebody for doing those things. If it has an impact on them, and if it truly requires their approval, I need to bring it up to them. Otherwise, it's a noise. And we are only creating hindrance and opportunities for others to tell us what we cannot do. And so I often say, if you don't want to do something, then talk about it to other people so they can convince you not to do it. But if you're really keen about doing something, well, then, confirm in your own mind that this is really good. Consult with your colleagues who are technically knowledgeable so they can evaluate your decision, right? So I would come to you and ask you, should I use this? Because you can evaluate the technical merit. But if I go to my business analyst or the business, they are not capable to evaluate the technical merit. So talking to them has no purpose. So talk to people who can influence your decision rather than talking to people who can actually not be of help to you in making the decision.
Some great advice there. Thank you. Next question is very broad. It's, what are your thoughts on functional programming? I assume we're in the Java sphere, but we may not be. But yes, what are your thoughts on functional programming?
It's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox. And I don't want to convince myself or convince anyone that that's the tool that we need to be using for everything. And when it comes to solving a problem, think of a hammer and a screwdriver as an example, right? There are times a hammer is a great tool. There are times a screwdriver is a great tool, and maybe a chisel at other times. And we have to ask the question, when is a tool a right tool to use? And on a given job, honestly, there are days I want to use multiple tools. There are times I want to use a screwdriver to, drive a particular screw into the table I'm trying to fix. But there are times I have to hammer things into place as well. And if your application requires a task that are pure functions that can be expressed as a set of transformation of data, if you're not dealing with exceptions, if you're not dealing with impurity, if you're not dealing with I/O, functional programming is fantastic. Functional programming reduces accidental complexity, but that benefit quickly diminishes the minute the code involves I/O or if the code involves exceptions. And to write code with exceptions and functional programming, well, let me put it this way. Exception handling is an imperative style of programming idea. And impurity and exceptions don't have a place in functional programming. So if I try to convince myself functional programming is the right way to do everything, I am going to actually end up failing in doing this because it is not the right tool when I have exceptions, not the right tool when I involve impurity by way of the interactions I have. So as a good programmer, I should be willing and able to choose the paradigm that makes sense at a given situation. So today, I write code in functional style, I write code in imperative style, and I'm willing to mix them together where it makes sense. And to have the choice, I think makes us better programmer than to have the bias towards one or the other. And I think we should be able to exercise the choice based on the context and situation that we are working in.
Definitely. So don't use a hammer to bang in a screwdriver. I feel like that's just that very successful meme, isn't it? Using the right tool for the job. Brilliant. Staying quite high level, what are you most excited about in Java 17 or just Java recently, and why?
There are quite a few things I've been excited about in recent versions of Java, quite a number of things. I have to say pattern matching excites me. Part of the reason pattern matching excites me is I'm talking about maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. I remember working on an application where I had a series of if-else statements, and my thought was, how could I minimize this? What kind of structures are available? Depending on the programming language I'm using, I always look for facilities to remove that burden and make the code more concise. Well, now that Java has pattern matching, I'm definitely excited about it. I've been talking about this to some clients that I have about sealed classes. They have a specific problem where their clients can use plugins, but they want to be able to limit the classes they can implement from interfaces. Sealed classes are a nice way to model it. Well, records are awesome, but the point though is now take records and pattern matching and sealed classes and mix them together. We got an amazing set of capabilities as well. But of course, the one thing that I'm the most excited about is what's almost there is Project Loom, right? And that's something that I've been talking about for a while. Very exciting to see what's happening there. So I would say, there are several things. In more recent conferences, I've been giving talks titled "The Amazing Features of Modern Java," where I spend 90 minutes talking about each of these features, and then yet another 90 minutes just spending time on sealed classes alone and how we can benefit from them. So definitely a lot of exciting things in the modern Java. And different flavors, right? It's not like there's one thing you can use, and because of the 6-month cycle and the evolutions over the past few years, there are substantial things we can actually do in modern Java as well. So it's a definitely exciting time to be using the language.
It really is. So the next two questions, I'm going to bring them together. What is your favorite JVM language specifically, and what language would you like to learn next, which may or may not be a JVM language?
So my favorite JVM language is the one I'm writing a code in for the client that I'm working with right now, and so it really changes by the day sometimes, and by the week. And the reason I emphasize that is one of the principles I follow is this: when I go to a client side, I never tell them what programming language they should actually use. This is a principle I follow, and the reason is. Programming languages are tools, and certain companies are using a certain language for a certain number of reasons. And trying to tell them they should use a different language, often I consider as a disservice. If their question specifically is, we are considering picking a different language, what should we use? That's a completely different discussion to have. And there's no clear answer to it. The answer would depend on their application and the needs of the application and so many other factors. So I've written books in multiple languages. I program today in about 15 different languages. I'm not good in any one of them by any stretch of imagination, but I diversify my knowledge portfolio to learn different languages. And the reason I do that is basically because I want to really learn from the different design paradigms that these languages offer, but I also try to stay away from having a favorite. Because having a favorite usually means that you want to not have a few things as favorites. But again, going back to the tools analogy, I don't want somebody walking around with a hammer saying, that's my favorite tool. Well, I would rather them focus on solving the problem than being tied to a particular tool. But in terms of learning different languages, I really try not to learn a language in general. What I try to really learn is a different paradigm. So I don't go look for languages to learn. I look for paradigms to learn. So over the years, when I looked at what I wanted to learn, I asked myself, what am I good at? And what am I really either not so good at, or what do I want to get deeper into? And I would be looking for languages that help me to focus on the different paradigms. So I look for things that would give me a little bit depth and understanding of the paradigms in general. Well, there's static typing and dynamic typing. There is functional and imperative. You can think about creating DSLs, writing languages that are fluent, languages that promote immutability. And how do you really build an entire application with total immutability in it? Languages like Elm, for example, really changed my thinking, because you are trying to develop a UI, and where most people say UI is all mutability, and Elm is like, hold my drink, I'll show you how to write my code without any mutability. So that's what really intrigues me. So I keep looking for these paradigm shifts in general, rather than programming languages to learn from. To me, programming languages are somewhat secondary. They are a means to an end. I don't learn a language, I learn a paradigm, but I use a language to really convey those ideas and how to really express those things.
That's a wonderful way of thinking about it. And you've answered the next question. Well, I think you've answered the next question, which is there a specific programming language that you would recommend Java developers to learn? And I'm going to maybe say that you would suggest learning paradigms rather than languages at this stage, or learning the right tool for the job that is.
Totally. So that's exactly what I would say. You ask the question, what do you really want to learn? As a Java programmer, I was talking to somebody about a few weeks ago, and the person was saying they have several years of programming in Java. And in the conversation, we said, well, we could do meta programming. And the person said, what is meta programming? Well, I'm not suggesting this is universal, but it's quite possible that somebody who has programmed in Java for years but don't have exposure to dynamic typing, don't have exposure to meta programming, don't have exposure to functional programming, to the true sense of what functional programming could provide, and so on. So ask yourselves, what's the paradigm you want to learn more? And then invest in maybe one or two different languages that will help you with it. I'll give you an example of this. This was years ago when I was programming with Java. I really wanted to learn more about dynamic typing and dynamic type languages. For no real purpose, I went on to learn Ruby at the time. And then a few years later, I said, I really want to learn about functional programming. So I picked up Erlang. I've never written production code in Erlang, but I spent the time learning Erlang. But the reason is not I wanted to learn Erlang, I wanted to learn the functional programming nature of it. But the beauty of this is Ruby led my way back into the JVM by way of Groovy, because Groovy is so similar to Ruby. And surprisingly, Erlang really brought me back to the JVM, because Erlang's model of dealing with concurrency really is what you see in Scala, at least it was back in time. And so knowing Erlang made it largely easier for me to understand Scala. Knowing Ruby made me easier to dive into Groovy. So that is kind of what the destination languages are different, but the paradigms are the same. So that's what I would say. Pick a few paradigms and let that drive where you want to go in terms of what you want to do.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. We're going to have a quick diversion over to Kotlin. After approximately 5 years, has Kotlin conquered its space, or will it always be set by many, or be seen by many as an alternative to Java? And related question we had in the chat, I'm going to throw it in here. Do you recommend learning Kotlin in the short term?
Well, I cannot say yes or no. And the reason I say I cannot say yes or no is it depends on what your journey is. And I would not have any clue about it. Right. And that's something I really strive hard to stay away from without knowing the context. If you are really interested in, programming Android, for example, then I would say, of course, you should really learn Kotlin. If you want to really learn about a different way of programming, maybe a lighter, design, maybe you want to get experience to design choices and multiple languages brought together in one place, and you're curious about Kotlin, sure, learn it. But I would say the answer to whether you want to learn Kotlin or not should be driven by what your end goal is. What do you want to achieve by learning Kotlin? I think that serves as a better motivation. I often feel a lot more motivation when I know what I'm going to do with it. And, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to write some DSLs with it. I want to know, how does it feel to write a DSL that can be verified at compile time? Oh my goodness, Kotlin can do that really nicely. I want to learn Kotlin. I've got a friend of mine who is investing in learning Kotlin because he wants to really start, writing more of the Gradle build files using Kotlin rather than using Groovy. That's a good enough motivation to learn the language. So I would say the answer to the question is, think about what you want to do with it, right? What is your purpose of going through that journey? Do we have an application? If you say, I don't have any of those desires, I'm just curious about the language and want to learn it, go for it as well. There's nothing wrong with it. But generally, if you know why you are doing it, the answer becomes clearer and you're going to continue to stay with it, but you're also going to invest more into it. So to me, I never learned the syntax of a language. What I learn is the semantics. I want the language not to make me type the code differently. I want the language to make me think differently when it comes to the design of the code. And that's a significant investment, because I read a page and I'm going to spend 10 hours writing code to practice what I'm reading. And I want to break the code. I want to put it back together. And to me, I'm not learning things at the surface. I want to go deeper and understand, appreciate, and I better be committed to it. So I would say, find the commitment, then learn what you want to learn, rather than simply saying yes or no. I would say, bring your motivation, and that'll get you through the journey when you start it.
Good advice. Thank you. This is a specific question with wider appeal. The minimum JDK version is being bumped up to JDK 17 on JavaFX and potentially with Apache 4.0.0. How should people in the education industry embrace these changes on such a fast pace?
So, is the question saying there are breaking changes in the language, or?
Not specifically breaking changes. I think the question is more referring to the relative fast pace that is just our industry. How should we embrace changes that are happening so quickly? What would be some advice for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually quite happy with the pace of the change. And the reason really is, if you really look back in Java 8 and Java 9, or even Java 7, the changes were really, really large. And that's overwhelming to us as developers. Whereas here, the changes are incremental. And we can keep up with them in a lot better way. And my recommendation is, if you are, so let's go back and ask a question a little differently. What makes it harder for us to keep up with the change to the language? I would say there are two things that make it really hard. One of them is the dependencies. So if you're using a particular dependency, maybe a container, for example, and if that doesn't move forward, you are held back because you cannot. But another thing that really impacts the ability to move forward is lack of automated feedback, facility. You make a change to a system, how do you know things are still working? So by minimizing dependencies where it's possible, and by writing automated tests, we can accelerate the change to keep pace with it. But even if you are or are not able to, investing in what we use is our professional responsibility. Imagine going to a doctor and the doctor says, I know medicines from 10 years ago and I'm really good at them. Let me help your family member recover. You're going to say, thanks, but no thanks, right? You want the doctor to be educated about more recent changes that are out there as well. And that's what you put faith in a doctor, because a doctor is a professional. You don't want a doctor who knew things 10 years ago. You want doctors to know what was created, 6 months ago, and to be cautious in bringing the medicines to us, but also knowledgeable at the same time. Well, that's a responsibility that we carry as a professional. If I don't keep up with the change and learn, I would never be able to apply them. So continue to learn, write pet projects, practice, create prototypes, and see where you can apply these things. And at the same time, facilitate change on your applications so that your applications can move forward at a faster pace. So ask the question, what are the impediments? Why am I not able to move a project faster, and try to remove those impediments? And so then we can actually start moving faster as well, and enjoy these amazing facilities that they are working so hard to bring to us.
Brilliant, thank you. We're going to do 2 more questions in the Java sphere and then move on to general. First question, could it be said that the Spring framework is taking the lead in Java development over Java Enterprise?
I'm going to skip that one. I try not to make statements that would not help anyone in particular, so I'm going to pass that.
Fair enough. Next one, this is a great one. Do you have any examples of useless tests that you have encountered? For example, tests that have been ignored or could never fail, etc.
Oh, one example is tests with no asserts written only to get high coverage numbers. That just absolutely makes me angry. And poor quality tests sometimes, and tests that are simply tests that test what the code is doing rather than a test that actually influences the design. You can write bad code and write bad tests to verify it's doing what it's doing. I would rather have a test that drives the design of the code so that we can think. The test must put ourselves in the shoes of a user of a code before the code is written. And if you are not writing a test and pausing and asking the question, is this what I want the code to do? Is this the way I want to interact with the code? If you're not doing it, then writing tests is a mechanical process. For me, writing a test is not a mechanical process. It is a process that involves a little bit of typing and a lot of thinking and a lot of debating, either debating with myself or typically with the person I'm pairing with. And then, complete the test and eventually write the code after that. So if not, I think most of the time we are simply, writing tests for the sake of writing the test, and that's not effective at all.
Brilliant. Couldn't agree more. Thank you. Test with no certs. Okay, going to move on to the more general questions here. And interestingly, we've actually got some groups here. So a lot of people want to hear the same thing. So the questions, I think it's all the same question, are: what are your tips on how to be productive? Please, can you reiterate on your unique approach to studying? And what's your tips for learning fast and solidly?
All right, really good questions. What was the very first one again?
The first one was, what are your tips on how to be productive?
Awesome. So so let me say, most of the books I write over a 2-week period, mainly because I don't have time. I travel a lot. It's really hard to focus on things. So my very first productivity is be very committed to what you do. Quit multitasking. So I follow a fairly good rigor in my day. I start my day, and very quickly in the morning, I would look through my emails and I would reply to my emails, and after I finish it, I would turn off my mail, and I say this with utmost sincerity. I turn off notifications on my computer. That's the very first thing. My computer has notification turned on from 11:59 p.m. to midnight, that 1 minute, because I'm never awake during that time. So in other words, my notifications turn off at midnight and they stay turned off until 11:59 p.m. So no notification on the computer. Secondly, no notifications on my phone. So it never tells me somebody is texting. If it's a family emergency, my wife and my children know Dad will not respond to text during the day. And they will call me on the phone if it's an emergency. If it's not an emergency, they leave a message, I get back to them when I can. So that's basically the understanding. And so no email when I'm working, no notifications, no tweet, no social media. And I tell myself, here's a task I want to work on. It may be a chapter I want to write, maybe a section I want to write, a code example I want to work on, a particular feature I'm implementing for a client, whatever that could be. And I tell myself, when I finish that particular task, I can check the social media if I want to. I can check my messages. I'll check my email, but never in between. And that may be 30 minutes. That may be 2 hours. That may be 6 hours, depending on the work I do. And to me, there's nothing more valuable than my own time. And there's nothing more valuable than somebody else's time. If I don't value, here's the funny part, right? Helen, if I come to you and say, give me $1,000, you're going to frown and say, are you kidding me, right? You want $1,000 from me. And I'm going to ask you, why can't you depart $1,000? You're going to say $1,000 is valuable. But you know what? You are capable of earning that $1,000 in the next few months, or maybe even sooner. But if I ask you for 5 minutes of your time, you will never, ever get that back. It's silly how we don't want to give money to somebody, but we foolishly want to give time to somebody. We cheat ourselves doing so. So ask the question, what is the value that you have on your time? And if I reject meetings, I tell people, don't invite me to this meeting because I am not valuable to this. My time is more valuable than spent on your meeting. I want to ask the question, what value am I producing? Am I going to make somebody better? Am I going to make myself better? If the answer is no, go do something else. And to me, I could be checking emails constantly. I could be looking for messages, but most of them are noise and the mental flow is disrupted. And if the flow is disrupted, it takes way too much time to become productive. So notifications, absolutely no. I turned off, and nobody can reach me urgently. But I also have a principle: reply in 24 hours or reply to them when you will get back. Again, I value people's time. So if somebody sends me an email, within 24 hours, I always reply. Or I send them a reply saying, I got your email, I will get back to you on the 17th with the information. And immediately I put a note on my reminder to say, get back to them on the 17th, and then I work on it. And so staying productive is very easy once we truly value our own time.
Wonderful, thank you. There's some phenomenal advice in there. Talking of time, we have time for one more question, and I'm sorry to people in the room, we are not going to get to all your questions, but Venkat has kindly shared his email there. So the final question that we're going to go for is, what are your top non-technical or soft skills? I really hate that phrase. Soft skills that every developer needs, and why?
Communication. If we are not able to articulate what we have, the ideas we have doesn't matter. So I think one of the most important things we should take the time to develop is the ability to really distill ideas in a way we can walk people through. And what that means sometimes is to really break it down and first of all, synchronize with them. So when you talk about what they know, what they understand, they feel connected. Then you say, now that we talked about it, here are the pros and cons of the approach. Now let's talk about some various ideas and design issues, for example. So the ability to communicate, I think, is extremely important. And over the years, not just for myself, right, observing my children, observing my colleagues, I find that the ones that are the most effective are not the one that know the most. It is the one that can know enough but communicate adequately. So I would say take the time to communicate and to learn to communicate. So it's a skill, and it's a skill we have to take the time to develop and explain the ideas to a colleague. Sit with them and say, let me explain what I know and tell me what you think about it. Is my understanding correct? We begin to think more about what we don't know when we start explaining it to somebody. So I would say the most important thing is the ability to communicate. And once we can master it, I think you can achieve almost anything, because people will give you their attention if you have the ability to communicate. I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for answering so many questions. I've just been throwing them at you for the last hour. Again, apologies, I didn't get through them all, but hopefully you will have some great insights to take away from that conversation. Venkat, as always, an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Well, thanks to you for making this happen. Thanks to Jade for organizing this. And thanks for everyone who participated and asked the questions as well. This was fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Venkat. Thank you all. Bye-bye.